Let me get the record button going. Here we go, folks. It's so great to have you here today with Sean Schroeder out of Blueriver, Sacramento Blueriver Interactive Group, the creators of the Mura Experience Platform, CMS. Sean, great to have you here.
Hey, Park. Thanks for having me. Appreciate it.
Hey, this time last year, you and I were hunkered down in a very hot conference room in Phoenix, Arizona, here at Park & Co., at the Business of Story, working on your brand story to pull it all together. And it is so much fun to see how far you all have come in just 1 year.
Yeah, thank you. That was a pretty tough day. No doubt. As you know, I came to you with a big problem. We've been struggling with our brand story for quite a while. To give you guys a little backstory, we decided one day, like, hey, it's time for a brand refresh. And we got our design team together and we said, hey, let's go revisit everything and send off our designers to go to work. And we're thinking in terms of more of a visual rebrand, not necessarily a brand story per se, because we didn't really know what that meant at the time. So we sent them off, and as it turns out, our designer started pushing some stuff around and stuff, and he didn't really got to the point where he came back to us and said, I don't really know what to do. He goes, I'm not really sure what direction I should take from a design standpoint, because I don't really understand enough about the business. And he'd been working, for us for several years. So that came as quite a surprise to us. I'm like, well, that's interesting, because we've been doing this for a while, and we assumed everyone was on the same page. And it turns out that we just didn't do a great job of articulating that. So we go, okay, well, maybe it's just that challenge of designing for yourself, and everything that you do for yourself, whether it's redoing your website or redoing your branding, whatever it is, it's always more difficult when you do it for yourself. So we figured, well, let's just do this. Let's just not do it ourselves. We're going to hire another agency to do it. And that way, because we're just way too close, they'll give us some good perspective. And we went down the path, hired an agency, they did some design studies, and they came back at the end with some stuff, and it was just okay. Design stuff was okay, but there was something missing. And the thing that was missing was the brand story. And I realized that because I had listened to Park on his podcast on the Business of Story. I actually called Park and used his Pick My Brain session once just to get a feel for him and kind of see what he was about, and really enjoy the conversation and what he was able to get me thinking about. So I immediately identified as like, okay, our problem isn't necessarily the visual design of things. The problem is that we don't have a brand story. There's nothing to rally behind. And so that's when I talked my business partners into letting me hire you to help us dig in and find out what our brand story was.
Well, Sean, and I'm glad you did. We had fun. I remember that first day was kind of rigorous going through, because you guys offered so many things coming out of Blueriver that it was first hard to put our finger on it. And I want to let our participants know that as we go through this, Sean is going to walk you through the story. I'll be moderating on the side, so feel free to answer ask any questions. I've opened up the chat window, and ask questions as you're going along, because if you're here, presumably you're trying to figure out how and why can you get your brand story straight and why it's important. And I think probably at the very top of the list is we live in this world of abundance, meaning that our customers have myriad of choices of who to select. And why do they select you and why do they select me all comes down to how we position ourselves in their minds, how we clearly define our product category, and we rise above the noise of our competition, and we actually stand for something. And that all starts by really understanding the why you do what you do and then articulating it through your brand story. So Blueriver, of course, is working in the very noisy, very crowded technology world. And they've got a wonderful CMS platform that's also, it's just a number in people's minds unless they can bring real meaning to it through the use of narrative and story, because after all, that's how we all communicate, especially us human beings. So with that, Sean, give us a bit of the backstory of what happened the first couple of years leading up to you and I finally getting together on this.
Well, that was kind of what I just explained at the beginning.
Well, I guess you did, yeah.
Yeah, going through that process and, not really having a clear direction. And it was interesting because we have two different sides of our business. We have our professional services where we do typical digital agency type work. And then we have our product side of the business. And so over the years, kind of evolved in these two different silos, and not that it was, bad or anything. It was just, you could see these silos being created, and we didn't really feel like that was the best thing for our business. And so the brand story was actually a way to help us bring those things back together.
All right, so let's dive in with what you found.
All right, so just real quick, just a little background on myself here. So I'm Sean Schroeder. I'm the Chief Commercial Officer at Blueriver and the co-founder of Mura. And I'm sharing this stuff with you because it's going to play a role a little bit later in this presentation. One of the things I like to do outside of work, and I enjoy my work immensely, but a lot of things that I do outside of work, I have 4 kids, so revolve around what I do with my kids, and I also play a little bit of music, recording and playing out live, and in addition to coaching. The 3 pictures you see coaching were actually from a single day of coaching. Started the morning coaching baseball, went to softball, and then finished the day coaching basketball. So it's a lot of fun, really enjoy it, but you're gonna understand why I'm sharing this with you a little bit later. So going into why we started this process of rebranding, as I mentioned before, is really to help simplify and clarify how we communicate with folks, to get everyone at Blueriver rowing in the same direction. As I mentioned, there are 2 silos that have begun to form, and we wanted to make sure that everyone was on the same page. And to do that, we needed to provide a clear vision of why we do what we do at Blueriver. And if we do that well, we figured, well, that will help us find our tribe. And by our tribe, what I mean is that will help us find people who, want to work with us, both from a customer perspective, but also who want to work with us from an employee perspective. Because finding the right people is super important to having a thriving business. So that was a big part of it as well. Also, to level the playing field. In our space, there's a ton of competition, from the small to the small to the biggest of the big. It's not uncommon for us to compete against very small software companies. At the same time, we're competing with Adobe and Acquia, Sitecore, some of the biggest players in our space. So that was one of the main reasons we really wanted to focus on the story part, because as a small organization, we don't have billions of dollars to throw around our marketing departments and just get our message everywhere. So we saw the brand story is really allowing us to have a way to level the playing field when we go in and compete against those big guys. And then finally, to differentiate, because as Park mentioned, we're in a very, very crowded space, not just from the agency side of things. There's a bazillion digital agencies. There's also, literally thousands of content management platforms out there. So we really need to find a way to differentiate. There's a quote by Don Schultz, who is considered the godfather of integrated marketing, that really resonated as I was thinking about this. And I realized this is something that we struggled with as a business for a long time, and thinking about how to stand out in a very, very crowded field. And this quote is great because it really drills down to the value of story. And he says, everything we do as an organization could be copied except how we communicate. And that's very, very, very true. Even from a technology standpoint, we come up against, things evolve over time, and of course other products add features, and there's kind of an evolving landscape, and sometimes you just have to do enough to maintain parity with what's going on in the field. But one thing that can't be duplicated is how we communicate, and that's why I love this quote by Don so much. To give you an example of this, if you look at from the product side, if we're talking about content management platforms, these are some of the taglines that I took a look at as we started this process. So like, okay, well, what does it look like out there? What is our competition saying? How are they talking about what they're doing? And you'll see here there's a handful. I mean, there's a ton out there. I just grabbed a handful at random to kind of show my business partners, what we were up against. And so you see some of these build remarkable websites and apps, content management system provider that helps enterprises deliver digital experiences, build better digital experiences for your customers. So you can see there's a lot of the same stuff going on. Nothing really stands out when you see them all against each other. And the same thing is on the agency side. I will say that agency side tends to be a little bit more creative and has a little bit more of a story, and some of theirs at least makes you think or question about maybe what their business values are and how they do business. So, for example, better ideas created differently, believe in better, the experience is the brand, and a digital agency for leading brands. But again, none of these really stand out. So we really need to figure out a way, like, how are we going to transcend this? And this is a hard thing to do. And this isn't necessarily a knock on anyone out there, because this is a very, very hard thing to do. And I wouldn't even say that we're nailing it right now, but we're working at it. And our brand story is helping us get there. And so we looked at it. So how do we do this? And again, it's by telling our story. But what's important about a story is not that it's just a story or a story format, or that it's a form of communication, but a story that is authentic because it's true, and it's true because it's why we do what we do. And story, I realized after talking to Park and thinking about it a bunch, it's like, okay, well, story's great. Okay, I get it. That makes a lot of sense to me. And it made me think back to a presentation that we did several years ago. We had maybe one of the most striking examples of the power of story that we had seen in our experience. And one of my colleagues was presenting at a conference and came up with a story about how this very small organization, was able to land a big client like Schneider Electric. And the way that happened, the whole story about how that happened, is a very, very cool story. I won't share that with you right now, but the takeaway from this is that he was at this conference delivering the story, and it was the only one that we ever got applause on. And people literally gave him applause after he told the story. Ironically, it didn't occur to us like, oh, well, that's because of the way that we communicated that. It had nothing to do with the details and the facts around it, but rather how we shared that information. And so years later, reflecting back, I was like, oh, you know what? We've already done this. And as you'll see later in the presentation, there's a lot of things that have been going on that we just weren't really aware of. And so Park was really helpful in helping us figure that out. And one of the things that he likes to say is what you make is a commodity. It's not what you make. It's what you make happen that matters. And that was really the whole crux of that Schneider Electric story, was what we were able to make happen within that organization, even though we were competing against some of the biggest organizations in the world that we compete with. But there's one, just take it one level deeper, because it's not just what you make happen, but it's why you do what you do. Sure, everyone is probably familiar with Simon Sinek. If you're not familiar with Simon and his Start With Why presentation, you can find it on YouTube. It's done, gosh, it's almost, I guess, about 10 years ago now. What's great, I think, about what Simon talked about in Start With Why, I think if you're not familiar with it, he gives an example of his structure and how most people start with, when they talk about their product or their services that they talk, when they talk about it, they start with the what, they tell you how, and then they don't even necessarily explain the why. And we're absolutely guilty of this. The example that he gave was, he uses Apple computers as an example, and he says, if we go from the outside in, this is what it would sound like if Apple was talking about their product. And keep in mind, this is 10 years ago. So, the context for this is a little bit different, and you'll understand that. He says, if we start with the what, at Apple, we say, we make great computers. They're beautifully designed, simple to use, and user-friendly. Want to buy one? So you can see it's not particularly compelling, and there's no why as part of that. It's just the what they do and how they do it. Simon argues that if we start with why and start from the inside out, and we go why, how, what, then that changes our messaging dramatically. You see his example in Apple. He says, everything we do, we believe in challenging the status quo. We believe in thinking differently. The way we challenge the status quo is by making our products beautifully designed, simple to use, and user-friendly. We just happen to make great computers. Want to buy one? And I'm probably not doing it justice, but Simon does a great job at that. And I highly encourage you to go check out his video on that. But it does make a good point. So then it got me thinking, as we're thinking about our brand story and we're getting ready to engage with Park, what was my why? And to give you a little background with Mura, Mura is a project that I essentially roped a friend of mine in to help me build to reduce friction in my work. I'm a former graphic designer, front-end developer, and one of the things that I hated doing most early in my career was hand marking up HTML and then trying to corral it over and over again. And so Mura was a way for me when we started creating this back in 2001 in order to bypass that process by automating it. And at the same time, it had some interesting things that came out of that. And was that I started creating something that I cared about, and it made me immersed in my work, gave me the opportunity to be immersed in my work. And in fact, being enriched at work, in turn, enriched my life away from work. And so in that way, Mura created meaning for me while I was striving to create it for our customers by making their jobs easier. And so it's kind of a win-win in that way. And I think a lot of things that in business are most greatly accomplished when you have those win-wins together. And so it also made me realize that much of what I do actually revolves around creating meaning in some way. And when I talked about doing things like coaching and playing music, it made me reflect on those, like, oh, that maybe those are the things why I'm so attracted to doing those things, because whether I'm coaching softball and calling pitches, or managing my son's baseball team, or playing music, everything to me creates a great meaning in actually doing it. And it does have some very big implications there. I didn't know that there was a thing for this experience. And thanks to Park, I now know that there's a name for this. It's called flow. And is a term that Mihai Csikszentmihalyi, a psychologist from Claremont College down in Southern California, and he spent many years, about 30 years, researching the source of human happiness. And what he found was basically what he calls flow. And he's written a book about it. He's written several books, actually, from books about leadership, books about athletic performance, and they all come back to this concept of flow. He defines flow as representing the feeling of complete and energized focus in an activity with a high level of enjoyment and fulfillment. And the technical term would be defined as the optimal experience state. So during the flow experience, we lose track of time and worries. Our level of focus maximizes our performance in and the pleasurable feelings from the activity. And though it is often associated with professional athletes, musicians, and artists, it is a feeling shared by every human being. So Park presented this to me, this idea of flow. Made sense to me. I was like, yeah, I think you're right. So we went down this path and went through Park's story cycle system. And we came up with a handful of different brand story elements. And I'm going to go through these quickly with you. Our brand position, first one, we define that as Blueriver is the #1 resource for the most free-flowing digital experience services and management platform for medium to large organizations. That's how we position ourselves. Our unique value proposition is Blueriver creates peak digital experiences by helping you find flow. Our brand promise is freedom, a result of allowing you to create flow. And our brand gift would be find flow. Another interesting aspect that informs other parts of your brand story would be your brand personality. For Park, we define this as a creator. And then our secondary archetypes would be our regular guy, gal, and sage. And if you go through this process with Park, this will make a lot more sense. I don't know, Park, if you want to talk about that at all in terms of how that reflects your brand, because I'm not sharing a bit about it here, but it plays a very, very instrumental role in the process.
Yeah, thanks, Sean. This is great. In the old days, we used to sit down with brands to try to figure out what their personality was, and we would ask stupid questions like, if you were a dog, what kind of dog would you be? If you were a drink, what kind of drink would you be? If you were a car, what kind of car you would be? And I was taught that at a young age in this business, and I never understood it. I was never sure what we were going to get out of that. And then I read a book on brand archetypes, and I started studying, coming out of Dr. Carl, I'm blowing his name, the Swiss psychologist.
Jung?
Yeah, thank you. And the 12 primary personality archetypes that our brains all deal with when we're trying to identify individuals that we're working, that we're connecting with. And I found that the same personality archetypes can be applied to your business, to your brand extraordinarily well. It makes you really dig down and understand what the character is of your brand and how you're going to express it to the world. And it's important because you want to be consistent through all of your channels on how you look, feel, sound, engage, the user experience, everything. as it relates to your brand archetype or your authentic personality. So that's what we do here. This is the 6th step of the story cycle system. When you start really understanding the mentor in this process, you are the mentor or the guide. And how do you go to market? What do you look like going to market? And as I hand it back to Sean, I will go and post on here a link to what those 12 archetypes are. So after the session, you can go and check out and kind of determine what might be best for your archetype and your brand. So back at you, Sean.
Yep. So that's great, Park. Thank you. One of the funny things you said was you talked about how we had to identify, or were taught to identify or describe a car, and that was actually the previous agency that worked with before we worked with you. Actually, asked us to find a car, and we picked the Audi.
The Audi.
The Audi, yeah.
And why the Audi?
Well, I guess it kind of relates back to the brand personality here, because it's kind of has it's kind of sporty but practical, not too hoity-toity, and yet not too pedestrian. So kind of right there in the middle.
Gotcha.
Going back to the regular guy-gal thing, and practical would be, I think, an attribute of the sage secondary archetype.
Yeah, and I think it's worth pointing out here too, Sean, that oftentimes you're going to end up with more than one archetype, but you can have that primary archetype. So in Blueriver's case, they have the primary as the creator. What they do both as an interactive group and with their Mura Experience Platform is all about creation and creativity. And oh, by the way, the principals in the organization are creators themselves, mostly musicians and others. And even when you dig down and start meeting the employees there, you find that they're all creators. So this primary archetype personality of creators fits them beautifully. And then have you ever, well, as you can tell with Sean right now, and you meet the rest of the gang, it's regular guy gal. There's no pretense with them. They're hardworking, they're creative. And so it starts really playing to what they do. And then the sage is like, man, they've been doing this a long time. They truly understand what's going on. So those two secondary archetypes simply inform their primary personality as the creator.
Yeah, perfect. So the next thing that we took a look at, and Park helped us find, was our brand descriptors. Part of this process that we had to go through and write stories that were real life stories from within our business that actually exemplify each of these brand descriptors here. So part of our process is I went and asked our employees to pick a word and then come up with a customer story that embodied these words. And it was a great exercise, and one that we're going to continue doing as we move forward in the business and continue to adapt our brand story. Our brand purpose would be Blueriver helps people find flow in order to simplify and enrich their lives. Going back to the whole idea of why I created or helped create Mura was to simplify and enrich my life. Our brand statement, and this is the last one here, is actually it's not the last one. Blueriver frees developers, content product managers, and marketers from the malaise of their digital environments, helping them find empowerment and accomplishment through its Mura Digital Experience Platform, enhanced by strategic content-driven design and development services that create peak experiences and enrich lives. And our theme is Find Your Flow. So Park and I worked through all these things. I was really excited about the whole idea. I was like, hey, this is great, man. I really get this. I do think it's authentic. And it really is resonating with me personally. And I can't wait to share this with my business partners, including as well as our UX director and our designer. So we went ahead and Park presented the concept, except it didn't look exactly like this. It was more like this. We were all huddled around a conference call. Park was sharing a screen, and he went through this whole thing explaining what flow was and how it was the part of our brand story and really the essence of what we do and why we do what we do at Blueriver. And this is the response that I got. I went over like a Led Zeppelin. Not great. And I tried to prepare Park for this because we are a cynical group. We're very sort of engineering driven group, even though we have a healthy respect for the more creative side of things. And I've learned that developers are actually very, very creative over the years. And so they're skeptical about anything. And this is their response. Reactions like that were, meh, why do you pick that? You could have picked any word, literally any word. Well, why not just say easy? And the last one was good enough, we have no time. So I was really disappointed Hopefully I prepared Park well enough for this, but kind of spun me out a little bit. So I said, okay, well, you know what? I'm not going to stop there. I actually truly believe in this idea. And so I dug in. And I found that flow is actually more than a big idea. It's not this just big, fluffy marketing speak, business storytelling thing. It really is an actual thing. And in fact, it's not just a state of mind. There are physical and physiological and neurological things that happen at the same time. And in fact, all of these chemicals are released when we are experiencing flow in the things that we do. I also learned that flow is also used in our line of work. We're creating digital experiences. And this example would be in video games. One example of this is Flappy Bird. Incredibly simple game, wildly successful. I've never actually played it myself, but in doing my research, I learned about Flappy Bird, and it basically breaks down to a handful of things. It has a very, very simple UI. It has a challenging task where you have to navigate the bird through the course. It has a clear goal, which is don't die, and it provides immediate feedback because you die early and often. And in fact, Flappy Bird is so great at creating flow that it became the #1 downloaded app for a while. The creator of it was making like $60,000 a day in advertising from it. At the same time, he's being vilified on social networks, and eventually he decided it wasn't worth it and shut it down. And so he took it off the App Store. But it highlights a very interesting thing about digital experiences, and that, in fact, this concept of flow is used in games all over the place when they're designing them. This is Curtis Murphy, the founder of GG Games, and he says, even though World of Warcraft, Flappy Bird, Minecraft, The Sims are fundamentally different experiences, the science of them is very much the same, and they all embody the characteristics of flow and leverage simplicity. And in fact, it's done by design. As they're creating video games, they look at, okay, well, where on this chart here do the challenge and the abilities kind of meet in order to create that optimal point? If people are overly challenged by a game, then they quit and they move on. If it's too easy, then they become bored and they check out. And so it's really this balancing act of finding balance between creating the challenge and the ability between those, and you get to that flow state. And in this example, what they're showing you is that they're going in the game, different phases of the game, and that's where they're trying to get there. So they deliberately build the choices that they make into the game, into the experience in order to maintain flow. I also learned that flow can also be used, or has also been used by the software development industry. In this case, this is Cynthia Maxwell. She's the director of engineering at Slack. She's formerly at Apple, Pinterest, and Yahoo. Man, I always get that wrong. My dad, when I was growing up, used to call people Yahoos. And so now every time I see Yahoo, I want to say Yahoo, and I get made fun of incessantly for that. Anyway, so Cynthia Maxwell was interested in this idea. She had a big project when she was at Yahoo, and she needed to bring on some engineers in order to kick off this project. It was a big project, very ambitious, the type of project that engineers really like to sink their teeth into, and she easily recruited some core workers from Apple. One of her star engineers, for a few months, came back to her and told her that he was going to go back to Apple. And she figured, like, man, so what's going on? This doesn't make any sense to me. This is a great project. I'm kind of dumbfounded here to figure out why he would want to leave this project. So she stepped back to look at it in a broader context. And she realized that the problem wasn't the work itself. It was about how her people were feeling about doing the work. And so she describes things this way. If I won the lottery tomorrow, I would still come into work. That's flow. Truth is, it doesn't have to be the lottery. It can be an offer from another company, the call of launching a startup, or any number of professional gravitational pools. It's about basic retention. That's how vital it is to help your team members experience and create a sense of flow in their work. And so she said, as a manager, I wanted to find ways to recreate those moments for my team to create what Csikszentmihalyi calls autotelic jobs. And she did this by using that chart that we showed earlier from the game designers. Same thing, where we're balancing the challenge and the skill. And how she did this was she had the one on the right, and she would just ask her team members to go ahead and just draw a dot on this chart how they felt about their job. And from there, then she would know how to either give them bigger challenges, to take things off their plate, whatever. She would more effectively manage their workflow in order to keep them happy and to find more meaning in their work. And I love this quote by her. She says, "This is not a performance evaluation. This is a performing evaluation. The question is, how can I get you more into your work, not get more work out of you?" And personally, that's one of the things that we have begun to think about in the context of our brand story at Blueriver. Another example is Masaru Ibuka from Sony, and he kind of reiterates this point. And when he was creating Sony, he said, he wanted to establish a place of work where engineers can feel the joy of technological innovation, be aware of their mission to society, and work to their heart's content. I think that point about working to your heart's content really speaks to that idea of flow and how getting into your work can help create that. There's one other aspect to it. So one of the things that I'm also interested in casually is economics, the psychology of it, and how all the different pieces, how it's so organic, and how all the different pieces kind of play together. And so there's a book that I really, really like called The Road to Freedom. It's a book about economics, but what's interesting, it's by Arthur Brooks. He's the former president of the American Enterprise Institute. And the first half of the book is really all about psychology. And so in his studies, he also found that he doesn't refer to it as flow, but he found that when people are productive in their jobs, regardless of what they're getting paid, they are 5 times likelier to be very satisfied than people who don't feel this way. And he says, of course, when we're being productive, we often get paid more, but the money is a nice side effect, not the cause of the happiness we enjoy. And if you go back and listen to Simon Sinek's Start With Why video, he also talks about this. So to sum up with a quote from Csikszentmihalyi, he says, "We are happiest not in pursuit of external remedies to our malaise, but when we are fully absorbed in meaningful activity." And this is what this all points to. And so we have to look at how is flow created. Csikszentmihalyi breaks it out like this. He goes, well, there are clear goals every step of the way. There's immediate feedback to one's actions. There's balance between challenge and skill, as we've already seen. Distractions are excluded from consciousness, and there's no worry of failure. All of these things combine, and they don't all have to be there, but they all combine in different combinations in order to help create flow. And when we have a flow experience, our self-consciousness disappears, action and awareness are merged, the sense of time becomes distorted, and the activity becomes an end in itself. And this was something that I know very well from recording and playing music and coaching, like I mentioned. And so as I finished up my research, I was sold on this idea. I was like, okay, I gotta make a big case for this to my business partners to get them on board. But the real question was, would it hold water with our employees? Because we can't get the employees into the brand story because it just feels like marketing to them, then it's not going to matter. And so I asked them over Slack, we use Slack and we're kind of distributed all over the place. I asked every single employee 3 questions. I said, do you ever experience a state of flow, of being in the zone or out of work? If so, how would you describe it? And is there anything you do to help you find it? They had no idea that I was working on this. So these questions are kind of out of left field. And I tried to state them in a way that wasn't leading the witness, so to speak. And so I will say I cheated a little bit because I intentionally targeted some of the most creative folks on our staff, including this guy, Jason, who does a lot of our sales. If you happen to come in contact with Jason, really nice guy. He is a stand-up comedian, and he also does painting. That painting behind him is something that he painted for his office. And so when I asked him, he answered a question like this. He says, yes, it can be anything. Painting, comedy, cleaning the house, times when you can clear out distractions, focus, and then things seem easier. And that's part of the trick, dampening distraction. I asked Michael, who's also a musician, as you can see, and he says, I think it's more of a matter of what I don't experience. I get into that zone when I'm deep into a project, coding, playing music, especially when performing or recording, like myself. But I thought this one was really cool. He says, the best one, though, is working outside, digging in the dirt, pruning a tree, building a block wall, when I realize a few hours have gone by and I wasn't really thinking about anything in particular. And the last one I'll share with you, or I guess not the last, second last one, is Evan, who is a friend, designer, and developer on the Blueriver team. And he says, I have different levels of getting into a groove, which I would often describe as reaching an autopilot state. And he's able to experience it through several different activities, development, design, gaming. And I like what he says here at the end. He says, I stop having to think about each step involved and have a clear picture of the whole task at hand. And the last one is Kevin. He's another creative. He's a project manager at Blueriver, and he builds these, what he calls a kinetic sculptor. Anyways, he builds bikes, really cool bikes. And these are the couple examples that he does. And he says, of course, I experienced that. Forgetting to eat for 10 to 12 hours while in the zone. Sometimes it just happens. Sometimes you have to push yourself into the zone. And sometimes no matter how much you want to be in the zone, you just aren't. And it was really interesting because I started saying like, oh man, these guys are actually using the same exact words that Csikszentmihalyi was using and that I found in my research. And so I realized that much of what we do at Blueriver at work is driven in some way by an attempt to create flow, even if we didn't have a name for it. Flow was in fact our why. And so I realized I was like, okay, cool, I think I'm onto something, but let's see if we can dig another layer deep. Let's go here. Let's check out and see, are we currently doing this for our customers? And so I went and went and looked at some reviews on GT Crowd to see like, well, what's there? Fortunately, we have a lot of nice reviews, some very kind people that have very kind things to say about our platform. And so I went to go look and say like, well, what is the language they're using and how are they talking about what we do? And here are a couple of the quotes from there. It says, I love how easy it is to use and change data files, very easy to use and manage. And relates that we have group trainings and new items that Mura has to offer. This other one says, Mura has the flexibility to create highly customized sites and hand off the day management information to multiple people in your organization, having little to no web design experience. Again, this is speaking to that ability to remove distractions and to eliminate that worry of failure that is necessary to create flow. Here's another one that kind of speaks to the same thing. Again, extensibility and flexibility, and solving common application build problems that you commonly run into. And so there's a couple other ones. I'll let you guys go into G Crowd if you're interested in seeing them, but it was really interesting seeing how we, how this language and the pattern and the themes that were emerging as I'm looking at all these different pieces. And this was really great for me to take back to my partners to get them on board because it made it very, very real for them. And they could no longer claim that it was just marketing at this point. It was living and breathing proof of what we do at work. And so the last step was I went and took and said, okay, well, let's look at, there's 8 elements of flow. I think we can take 5 here and we can apply these to different things. So we talk about, the first one is clear goals. And why we do that is because the completion of small goals links to larger goals, which in turn link to even larger goals. And this linkage creates a series of rewarding experiences that enable flow. We go to feedback. Why do we need feedback? Well, it turns out that feedback occurs directly or after midway through the completion of an action leads to the strongest association between the action and the outcome. We look at the balance of challenge and skill. Stress and performance affect flow. As goals become increasingly difficult, commitment diminishes. And as I talked about that in the context of Cynthia Maxwell, and video games, people get bored, they also check out on the other side. And then, of course, eliminating distraction is imperative because if you have extraneous information coming at you, especially in our work lives, we get bombarded with email and Slack and God knows what else throughout the day, people coming into your office, whatever it is, and that can really inhibit your concentration. And the last thing is the worry of failure. So, and part of that feedback loop is that as you're getting that feedback and you're making progress towards a goal, if we have that linkage of goals, getting feedback on that helps drive our engagement and accomplishment, and at the same time helps reduce our worry of failure because we know we're making progress towards that goal. And so I'm going to show you a couple examples here how we applied this in our business. So we looked at, first thing was we looked at, our audiences. We looked at, one of our key audiences is content and product managers. And so we looked at, how can we define concrete goals for each of these audiences? And I'm not going to go through every one because there'd be way too many to go through here, but I'm going to show you a couple examples. Some concrete goals for content product managers using our product. We can do this by creating requirements and balancing our UX strategy to ensure an efficient, effective experience. Do things like maybe focusing your dashboard around tasks and workflow, in addition to other important metrics. That's one example of how we might do this.
Hey, Sean, I got a question for you.
Yep.
A couple of them have started to come in. Now, in one case, we were able to define your brand story around helping your customers, clients, employees, shareholders, even your families find flow to simplify and enrich their life. And then you did a deep dive. You interviewed your staff just to make sure that this was actually already embedded in the DNA of Blueriver. And then you went online and looked at what your customers were saying. Was this like an inordinate amount of work to proof out this flow, or how much time was invested by you to really understand how this impacts and reflects who Blueriver is?
Well, I probably bit off more than most people need to, but I didn't want to leave anything to chance with my business partners, being that they're incredibly skeptical folks. You know this because I had to ask you if your money back guarantee was still in place, because I needed to use that in order to say, hey, just indulge me and let's go down this path. And if it doesn't work, then we can get our money back from Park.
Yeah.
And so it was a ton of work, actually. And I spent several weeks going through all this stuff, and it wasn't dedicated time. Of course, I have many different things that I have to do at work. So it wasn't 100% of my time, but it was a significant amount of time, and it was the highest priority at the time.
Well, and I think it's important to note to folks that if you don't really invest in your brand story first to understand what it is, and then to do some digging and make sure that it is true and authentic to your brand, then you will come off like Sean's partners were afraid. It's just marketing. There's no depth to it. So I do encourage you that, starting, refreshing, growing a brand is very much like having a child. And I've had 3 of them. Well, my wife has anyways. Is once you arrive at, that brand in its infancy, then it is your job to raise it and to help it evolve and help it change, but to help it really live into its personality. And so to do the digging you did is really impressive. And yet it's just a way to proof out, to make sure that your brand story is accurate, is clear, and is going to stand the test of time because you've gone deep with it.
Yeah, and one of the things that I guess we're the benefactor of was, flow was such a, to me was just presented so many opportunities for it. It had very defined things there, and when you start seeing the pattern, it was easy for me to like, oh, okay, well, I can see how this can apply to our employees, to our customers, to our audiences. Lots of different ways. And it was fun because you could start going through the process of mapping those things back to those 5 goals, and every aspect was actually creative flow itself.
Yeah. Now, when you first did this, I have a question on our Q&A. Asks, how long did Sean work with the other agency on your brand? And it sounded like you weren't, arriving at really what you needed to do. The question goes on, was he reluctant to spend more money and give you a shot? I think you probably heard that reluctance right there when they said, do we actually get our money back if it doesn't work? And what was the impetus for coming to this consideration set and ultimately the decision? I'm not sure if I quite understand that last question, but how reluctant was your team to now, after already going through the brand work and not getting there, to do it again?
Well, it was different, right? The design part was, we were disappointed in the design aspect of it, and we're pretty picky when it comes to that stuff. So the fact that everyone else was also disappointed helped, and you know, I basically had to talk them into it. I mean, it wasn't, it wasn't they wanted to go on it, but no one really knew what to do. And I was like, I think I have an idea. Indulge me and let me try and figure this out. And they were gracious enough to allow me to do that.
And then, Sean, going through the process. So we sat down and we took you through the 10-step process. What did you find? How did it help codify the brand story in your mind of just doing the hard work of going from, step one of determining your position in the marketplace to that final step 10 of what is the purpose? What do we do that is beyond making money at Blueriver? Take us a little bit through what you learned in doing that brand process for your story.
Can you rephrase that for me? I want to make sure I answer this correctly. That was a lot of words.
That was a lot of words. So we literally and deliberately went through, and I think at one point you even called me a brandthropologist, because we dug deep into the personality and the human impact that you were already having internally. But when it came down to really defining your brand story, take us through, what did this process reveal to you in creating your brand story? Not just about the flow, but as a professional communicator, what did you learn through this brand story process?
Well, it was interesting. I learned, validated some things, and I learned some things that I didn't know. So it helped validate, by coming up with this flow, it definitely validated that we actually had a why, that we did exist for a reason that had nothing to do with making money. So there was that aspect of it. Then the other aspect of it was, looking at our audiences, it really made me think critically about how we're communicating, how we're being deliberate in doing what we do at Blueriver as it applies to each of the audiences, our developers, content product managers, and marketers. So that was, I think, one of the most interesting aspects for me, because I think, when we talk about being customer-centric, I think many people feel like, oh, I know my customer. And I certainly did. And I know people, my business partners, feel very strong that they know our customer as well. But as I was digging in, I realized that I had some blind spots in there. I knew some more than others, and some I didn't know as well as I thought I did. So that was really helpful, digging into that process and really having to think critically about those things.
Yeah. And I think the other thing that we experienced, at least that I saw from the outside looking in, is when I first presented the concept of flow to you, you were first like, well, what the hell is that? And I said, well, it's everything you've just been explaining to me, over the past couple months and working in your brand. And we then dialed down and defined what flow was. But then it took you, and to get your principals involved, to do then that digging within your organization to make sure that it was true to who you were and what you were about. And that's, I think, is where at least I saw the aha moment come together for you all. And I saw it again at the MiraCon conference that I spoke at a couple months ago, when all of a sudden the people in the audience, your crowd there of developers and marketers and content folks, after you presented this concept of flow to them, they started talking about flow and started recognizing it in their own life. So it goes back to what your ultimate purpose is to help people simplify and enrich their lives by helping them find their flow, whatever that might be. And your vehicle happens to be digital content marketing and your Mura Experience Platform to do that.
Yep, exactly. So really, we're looking at how we, define that for each of our audiences. I'll, showing you a couple of examples here. We also went beyond our audience. Okay, we're going to map what we can do for them in terms of creating these, mapping what we do to these elements of flow. It also went to our employees as well. So, giving them clear and timely feedback by having, ongoing engagement with each person reports to, doing scaled reviews, client reviews, maybe even peer reviews. We looked at this from every single angle, and in addition to our content strategy. So through a combination of, say, if we pick an example here for developers, wanted to create content that was both actionable as well as some thought leadership content. So if we're talking about actionable stuff, what are some tools that we can help create flow for people by making their lives easier and providing them with tools and shortcuts in order to create that flow experience for them at work. and then also thought leadership as well. How can we get them thinking bigger about things that they can then apply at a bigger level to what they're doing? So it really informed every single thing we do. Including our brand messaging, and how we're going to basically talk about everything, which is not an easy thing to do. If you go to thenewblueriver.com, you'll see that this is our first stab at doing this, but I'm not sure we're there yet. Your brand story is an evolutionary process.
And you had started showing your brand story work in your website right before MuraCon, and I think it also impacted the graphics and the logos and so forth that you've done. You're starting to get more of that flow coming through. Can you talk a little bit, Sean? I mean, you really got total buy-in, I guess, at the end of last year, the beginning of this year. What have been your next steps, knowing that it's not going to change overnight, that this is a long process to incorporate your brand story? What did you then do to start incorporating it and activating it within your company?
Well, the first thing we did was go back to square one. This whole thing started because we wanted to redesign our website. And so that's where we picked up right where we left off with everything else. And so we went back and started working on building out the website and rewriting content and trying to come up with a way to help communicate the flow, these ideas of flow and including why we do what we do at Blueriver. So that's the first step. I wouldn't say it's perfect, but it's evolutionary. It's a work in progress, and we're going to keep working on it. But that's where we started. The next step, Q2 or Q3, we're going to look at operationalizing flow within the business. So we're going to have each head of each department map what they do within Blueriver to those 5 elements of flow. And then the next step is how can we, so when we do, say, user experience design review, we look at how is the flow of the user experience mapped back to these 5 elements. Yeah. So there's lots of different ways that we're start operationalizing and we're being very, very deliberate about what we're doing.
And I think one really good point to underscore there, folks, is that when you create your brand story as a part of the process, we ask you, when you're thinking about your personality, to come up with 9 brand descriptors. And if you want to break those down, it might go into 3 groups. 3 descriptors that describe the company, where you've come from, why you do what you do. 3 descriptors about the product or the service offering. And then 3 descriptors, one-word descriptors on what that customer interaction and what you make happen in their life. And then, as Sean was talking about, get your people to go back and find true stories of customer engagement, product, service engagement, whatever that might be, using each one of those descriptors as a theme per each story, and start building an archive of story content that now starts supporting your new brand story as you have created it. So you don't have to go out and develop some sort of crazy, wild, creative campaign. Find the true stories within your organization and within your customer base that support your brand ethos and what you're about, and start telling those stories. Build a storytelling culture internally, because it is like the best content creation program you will ever have. And then start sharing those stories in both your inbound and outbound marketing on blogs and podcasts and whatever. And you will find that it'll not only strengthen your overall brand, but it's going to strengthen your communications, because you are telling true stories, well told, about the human impact you're actually making in this world. And that all goes to support your overall brand personality and what your organization is about.
Yeah, one of the things that I like most about that park, and that I've discovered as part of our content creation process and our content marketing, is those stories actually give you, kind of that umbrella for you to spin off many different content assets out of that one story that you create. Because if you start digging into the details of that story, for us, we find what are some of the things that our development team did, or how did we help their development team do these things, and break it down. What is that process, and what are the tactics that we used in order to make that happen for the customer? Wow. And there's, kind of like they talk about, content marketing, being able to atomize it, and start with your, often referred to as that, a big rock piece of content. This isn't so much a big rock piece of content itself, but it does allow you to atomize it and dig into the details there. That gives you infinite opportunities for blog posts, for infographics, for all the different types of content that you can create around that single story.
Absolutely. Sean, we're coming up to the top of the hour. Do you have any final words you'd like to share? And we'll open up for additional questions for anybody.
I do. So last thing is I just want to share, we talked about Simon Sinek, and so I want to apply our before example when we used to start with what and where we ended up by starting with why. How we used to talk about it, and we literally did this just about a year ago in a presentation for a potential customer. We said we design and develop digital solutions to power great customer experiences. In essence, saying, want to hire us. After we went through the brand story process, we came up with this new one. Starting with why. We say, we help people simplify and enrich their lives by helping them find flow. We do this because productive people are happier and find more meaning in their work. We just happen to design and develop digital experiences and a platform to deliver them. Want to hire us? So to me, that says a lot more about us as a business than just saying what we do. So, Park, thank you for having me. I used that one intentionally because I felt like that guy when I was presenting to my partners.
When it was all said and done. Sean, we had another question here is, do you have any visual examples of the before and after of this process?
I don't. I apologize.
That's okay. By this time next year, you will have a whole bunch of them.
Yes.
Because I've seen a little bit of them coming. You know, it just takes a while once you get the brand story dialed in to start building out those materials. So, yep. If you would like to start getting your story straight now, you can go ahead and download your DIY brand story strategy guide and do it yourself. You can walk through it, or you can certainly hire me and I can help you do that, as I did with Sean and the Blueriver gang. I've been doing this for 35 years and it is just a blast. I really incorporated story and storytelling narrative structure back in 2008, 2009, and have now worked with hundreds of brands and helped thousands of the people that support them to get their brand story straight. So, you know, this is what this is all about. And Sean, I really appreciate you being here today with everybody and sharing with us what you've been through. It is a lot of work, folks. I'm not going to lie to you. You know, it takes time to sit down, to really get super clear on who you are and what you're about and how it is reflected through your brand story. What the story cycle system does is helps you get very clear on what that is. And I can tell you, I never have gotten bro hugs before after brand story sessions, but doing this, I get people that come up and say, man, this is the first time that we've actually coalesced around the story, that we're all on the same page on what the story is about. And I think the reason why that is, actually, I know the reason why that is it connects on a human level of why you do what you do. Because, you know, to be crystal clear, you get up early in the morning, work late at night, work weekends, you give your heart and soul to your business because hopefully you love it and it's what you stand for. What we often get caught up in is this left brain logical thinking that we only talk about what we make, when it's really coming down to what we make happen in people's lives. That's what they care about, and that is what your story is all about. So if I can help you, certainly download that, get your story going. Here's my question, comes in from Candace. What is the one thing you now would tell yourself when you started? I'm so just switching. What is the one thing you would tell yourself now when you started this journey?
Oh boy. What is the one thing I would tell myself now?
After going through it, yeah.
I should have done this a very, very long time ago. It would have saved myself a lot of pain and a lot of consternation. You know, to Park's point, the great thing about figuring out what your story is that's authentic and true, it becomes that North Star that you can follow. And everything else just kind of falls in line because of that. And it was, it was a big deal for us because we truly felt like we were lost in the woods, and kicking myself for not digging in sooner, because you feel like, we felt like, I think, and I'll speak for my business partners when I say that, but it feels like, you know, a lot of things can be solved with design alone, and then just add your words in there. And obviously, if there's any copywriters or content people in there, you're going to cringe by saying that. But, from our background, me being a designer and a developer, it truly felt like that. But when we saw the result of not focusing on the brand story and really digging down to who you are as a business, there's not a lot there. It is, I guess, for lack of a word, just marketing at that point. Once you figure that out, it's no longer just marketing, it's just what you do. And there is and you never have to feel awkward, like, we are horrible marketers. I remember the first conference we went to, and they picked me to speak as a sponsor, and I started going to this thing, like blah, 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 marketing, yada, yada, whatever. And eventually I just said, you know what, we do stuff, we're happy to be here, happy to sponsor the conference or whatever, and just kind of bailed out because I didn't really know, it's like you feel compelled to talk about things to sound a certain way. And a brand, knowing your North Star, having that North Star allows you to just completely forget about that stuff and just be who you are and just talk about why you do what you do, which is very, very powerful, I think.
Candace, thanks for your question. And Jose, thanks for checking in too, where I'm currently working with Jose and his team. So we're just finalizing their brand story. And I thought, man, this is a perfect time to hear somebody else has been through it so that they can proof it out. Sean, I've got a question from Lucas Lee. I believe this is my nephew up in Portland. Hey, Lucas, great to have you here. Lucas asks, how would you use the art of flow and storytelling to get the unmotivated team members involved in what you were trying to do as a business? Do you feel this is a way to change the mindset of an entire team?
I do think it's a way to change the mindset of an entire team. And in fact, that's what we're doing at Blueriver. As Park mentioned, so I've gone through this presentation a few times now. So I started with my business partners, gave it to our employees, gave it at MiraCon, and now sharing it with you via Park. And what an interesting thing is that you start, the more you talk about it and the more that it becomes a part of the fabric of your culture, the more you start seeing it show up in other places. Even people who are skeptical, Evan, one of our employees that I shared his quote about flow earlier was hilarious. We started MiraCon, and before I introduced Park, I said, hey, is there anyone here that, how many of you think business storytelling is BS? And, there were a handful of people out there. I know that people were lying because I know a lot of people think, that way. But I went through that, and Park went through his presentation and got some great feedback. We spent some time talking about, the new Blueriver brand story and what it meant for our customers and our community. And next thing you know, it starts showing up in presentations. People throughout the day, as they're doing their sessions, it started showing up. And then at the end of the session, I asked that same question again, like who still thinks storytelling is BS? Park gone through his workshop and giving his keynote. And the only person that raised their hand was Evan, that developer. But the ironic thing about that was literally the night before, I'm working on my presentation at the office, and Evan pops in and tells me a story using what Park calls the DNA of story, using the ABT. And I pointed out to him, I said, you just did that. You didn't even know you were doing that, but you did that. And so some of these things, if you start pushing them forward and try and incorporate them as a fabric of your culture, like with our employees, we're going to start using that chart for performance that Cynthia Maxwell uses. Pick a point on this chart about how you feel about your job right now. And then that gives you a jumping off point where you can have meaningful conversation about some of the things that, if the challenges are too high, well, what can we do to get you back into that flow state? If it's boring, what can we do to make it more challenging for you? So, I think if you just start small, start picking things up and start going, then things kind of take on a life of their own.
Yeah. The one thing I found too, Sean, is when you really get your story straight and you start living into it, it's going to make some people uncomfortable. Those that are aspirational are going to be uncomfortable, like, man, I got to get after it. It's also going to get some other people sometimes to vote themselves off the island. And when you get really clear with it, they're like, you know what? This isn't me. This isn't what I'm about. And you find some people leave. And that's good. Mm-hmm. That's actually good for them and their careers and their mindset. Mm-hmm. And it's fantastic for you and your brand and the brand ethos that you're trying to build. That's another real added value of when you get your brand story straight about this is what we stand for here at Blueriver, at Business of Story, at wherever. just today, in fact, this morning, they put up a link to a TEDx talk, my very first TED talk I did about 2 months ago, TEDx Gilbert. And it's important for you to watch, I think, because it goes back to talking about find those moments, find the scenes that inform who you are today as a leader, or what your organization is today as a leading organization. Start knitting those moments and those scenes together, and your story is going to appear before you. We did not invent flow. We did not say, hey, Sean, you and your team could have this whole new concept out there. It existed. It's been around since the beginning of time, and Mihaly Csikszentmihalyi identified it many years ago. It was just in how Sean told us about them, himself, his family, his leadership, and what Blueriver was about as people. And then how they would go out of their way to work with their clients. That flow was the obvious thing. Even he said, wow, was that just like this aha moment for you? And I go, no, actually, it was like literally one of those shower moments. I know too much info, but just thinking about it, all I was trying to do is connect the dots of everything that he had told me, everything that we captured in the 10-step story cycle process. And I literally say, what does this feel like? And it's just like, oh, duh. He's talking flow. That's what they are all about, from musicians outside of the company to what they do to build the company the way they've created it, to create flow for their employees, to what they deliver for their clients. It just hit me upside the head. It was like, duh, it's all about flow. So that's going to happen to you too if you take the time to get really straight on who you are, what you're about, and how that is reflected through what you do within your organization or as a brand. It goes back to why you do what you do. That's what people are going to buy. Your how and your what are commodities. It's what everybody else is fighting you to do. So you still got to deliver well on that. But it comes back to what is truly the ethos that your brand stands for, that connects on a human level to people.
Yep, that's exactly right.
Yep. All right. Well, it sounds like Hazel wants us to get off here too. Hazel, stop that already. That's my guard dog, Hazel, back here, our golden doodle. Thank you, Sean, for coming, being a part of this. It's really great to hear how it all came together. You dove deeply into flow, which was great because it is literally at the backbone of what your brand story is about, and I think that's important. So thank you for being here, and thank you all for joining us on this edition of the Business of Story webinar to help you get your brand story straight.
Yeah, thank you, Park.
Absolutely. All right.